My grandmother and Mrs. John Deere were sisters, and we made that venture from Vermont, as you heard earlier, to Illinois back when my father was just a baby. In fact, my father and Charles Deere shared the same box cradle in the wagons coming over. Well, I was born in Polo, Illinois, or Polo, and so interesting. We saw John Deere at our house frequently, and I was always in awe of the man and the accomplishments that he was involved with. I remember one day as a kid, though, a vivid memory. He gives my two brothers two brand new shiny quarters. Now, back in that day, a quarter was worth a lot of money. So I was so jealous. I ran in the house and I tried everything I could to get his attention, to stand in front of him, anything at all to get a brand new quarter. And he just didn't seem to pay attention to me, unfortunately. My mom finally pulled me aside and said, "Burton, if you want a shiny new quarter from John Deere, you're gonna have to go work for it." So that's exactly what I did. At the age of 16, I wrote a letter to Charles Deere asking for a job. Well, he promptly replied, and so at the age of 16, I came to Moline, Illinois, and got a boarding room, and I took a job in the shop at John Deere. Now, my job was loading Gilpin sulky plows. These plows were 265 pounds apiece, and I was expected. I was 16 years old, a short-statured kid. I didn't weigh half that amount soaking wet, and there was no way on God's green earth I was lifting a plow up and getting it loaded. Well, Henry Conrad, the foreman, came around, and he yelled at me. He said, "Pete, get those plows loaded, or you're going to be fired." And I told him, I said, I can't lift them. He said, "Well, you're fired." I said, "Well, fine then." So I went back to my boarding room, started pouting a little bit, but then I got thinking, I hadn't been here 2 weeks. I can't go home with my tail between my legs because I got fired from John Deere. So I went back to work the next day. And lo and behold, here comes Henry again. He's walking around. He sees me working. He said, "Pete, I thought I fired you." I said, you did, but I need to work." And he just went, "Ah," and he walked away. So I kept working. Well, interesting side note to the story. In 1942, when I became president of John Deere, I saw old Henry. He was operating the elevator at the time. So I get on the elevator, and I was a little bit of a prankster. You know, I had that kind of a personality. So when we were on the elevator, I said, "Henry, how you doing today?" "Fine, sir." I said, "You remember back when you fired me from this company?" He said, "Yes, sir, I do." I said, "Well, Henry, I've got some news for you." I said, but to give you that news, I need you to come to my office at the end of the day." Boy, he turned white as a ghost. I knew. I got him. Hook, line, and sinker. So he comes up to my office at the end of the day, and he walks in. I said, "You remember when you fired me, didn't you? And I have some news for you." "You know what that news is?" "I can only guess, sir." I said, "Well, I'm promoting you today." I said, "You let me stay, and you let me keep working at Deere." And I said, "Today, look where I'm at." I said, and that's what he did. He promoted him. So that was kind of a neat end to that story. But back to when I was still yet a teenager. I was 16 when I started in the shop, but I soon made my way into the office. I just wasn't cut out for the heavy lifting and the heavy shop work, but they realized I was really good with numbers. I became an assistant bookkeeper, and I would oftentimes help my predecessors till 10 o'clock at night, helping them with the books and the numbers and such. I was 18 years of age when I was promoted to the billing clerk for John Deere, so that's a pretty good position to have at the age of 18. I realized my own potential at that point, and I thought, you know, to excel, I'm going to need to go back to school. And so I decided to do so, and I attended the University of Iowa for a year, and then I transferred to Harvard Law School, and I went there for 2 more years. I moved back to Dixon, went into a law firm for a short period of time, just until I could take the bar, and I passed the bar, And soon Charles got in touch with me. He said, hey Burton, why don't you come back to Moline, set up a law office, become our accountant and our lawyer. And I thought that sounded like a pretty good deal to me, so that's what I did, and I set up a law office down where the old post office is at. So I practiced law for 13 years during that time, representing Deere, working as their accountant. But I have to say, during that 13 years of time, probably my most significant contribution came in a case that I defended Deere on, and that was a McCleary versus Deere case. Well, McCleary happened to be this gentleman who mistreated horses pretty badly, and so he was fired from his job. A month later, he reapplied for a new position in the company, and and they hired him. So he started working in the shop on a grinding wheel. Well, as luck would have it, or not have it for him, the grinding wheel, the emery wheel, broke into pieces. Some of it hit him in the ribs and broke his ribs. And so he decided to sue Deere. Well, as I did my good research, I come to find out that there was some mishap here, there was some deception going on, and we ended up winning the case. Well, the next day, Charles Deere comes down to me to congratulate me on winning that case, and I told him, I said, Charles, something came of this, and it got me thinking. I got a suggestion for you. What do you say that anytime anybody ever gets hurt in this factory, there's no question as to whose fault it was, and we pay all the medical expenses, and in fact, to top that off, we even pay some compensation for possibly time lost on the job. Well, can you imagine what Charles said to me? He looked me square in the eye, and I quote, Burton, that's the damnedest, most foolish idea I've ever heard. And he stormed out. Well, next day, he called me down to his office, and he said, Burton, I got thinking about what you said, and you know what? I went ahead and made it policy. So, interesting about that, in connection with that, well, for the next 10 years, we never had a single case come against us. So the company actually saved money in the long run. But in 1910, the Illinois legislature passed the Workmen's Compensation Act. Well, they did so primarily because of the precedence that was set at John Deere. So I felt pretty good about that. I found that to be a pretty successful part to my life. In 1908, two things happened in my life. Number one, I had a daughter born to me. Not to me, but I had a daughter born. I had all daughters, and in fact, I wanted to pass on the family name. I really wanted to have a son, but God didn't have it that way for me. So I went ahead and I named her Burton F. Peake Jr. And she's right here. Now, unfortunately, diphtheria took its toll at the age of 3, and she passed away, and never did get to pass on the family name. I was married twice. My first wife died at the age of 34, just 1 month after the birth of a child. That was unfortunate. But in 1908, Charles Deere passes away. I quit my law practice and I go to work at Deere full-time. I was the trustee of the estate. I became the treasurer of Deere. During that time, another huge accomplishment that I would have to attribute myself to doing here. Not to pat myself on the back, but that's what I'm here for today, is to do that. So, interesting, the success that we had at Deere really came during a 7-year project that I was involved with. And I purchased the subsidiary companies and supplier companies for John Deere, essentially consolidating the company. And this really was a turning point in making John Deere become a much bigger organization and a much bigger company. So I'm pretty proud of that. Now my obsession, which is golf. The home that I lived in here in Moline is directly across the street from the Deere Wyman house. It is currently the Rock Island County Historical Society. But I had a second home in Augusta, Georgia. Can you imagine why I would want to be in Augusta, Georgia? For 26 years have a home there? I think you might be guessing it, especially those of you who love golf. It's the Augusta National Golf Club, which I helped to establish. Not only was I a treasurer there and helped to establish that, I helped to establish the Masters Tournament in 1934. When I passed away, they erected a cabin there in my honor and in my name, but they also hung a plaque there that still hangs there today that says Burton F. Peak hit more golf balls in his lifetime than any other amateur. And so I think that was true to say that. If you talk to my friends, they would say that I was happy-go-lucky. I loved life. I loved people. I had a good sense of humor. And my friends would tell you too that I made absolutely the greatest martini on earth. So cheers, folks. I'm Burton F. Peak, 1872 to 1960.
Thank you.
Thank you.